Good Friday morning to you. Welcome to Matthew study number 70. It is, well, I kind of celebrate every single round number, but it still is hard to imagine that we've had 70 of these Bible studies together. I know that there probably have been some who've wondered, is this something that, Mark has just started and he's not really going to be able to continue? To be honest with you, I've asked myself that question too, because as a church planter, with all of the details that are necessary to be involved in getting a new church started, well, there just are times when, doing this Bible study with you can really take out what seems to be a whole lot more time than what I should be devoting to it. And yet, I don't think there's any single thing that I do that I have greater joy from than doing this Matthew Bible study. And if you've been with me for 70 of these, then you also are to be congratulated. Thanks for hanging in there with me. And thank you also for telling others about it, because I know every week we have new people who are joining us in this. I just want you to know that it is my firm commitment to continue to do this every single day. And there's just nothing that gives me greater joy than to share these Bible studies with you. And frankly, there's no one who's learning more about the Bible than what I am. So let's take our Bibles again this morning, on this Friday morning, and take a look at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, which we find in Matthew chapter 5. We are in the section that traditionally is known to us as the Beatitudes. And I'd like to begin reading again with Matthew chapter 5, verse 2. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Again, we're going to stop with verse 5, because I think there's more to be understood about this idea of the meek. Yesterday, I tried to do a little bit of Bible teaching in terms of how to study the Bible, not just in terms of giving you the answers to the Bible, because frankly, I don't have all the answers either, as many of you know, and have written and questions to me and challenged me, which I very much appreciate. But sometimes we get to places where we just need to know how to study, how to get to the answer. The old proverb, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but teach him to fish, and you fed him for a lifetime. Well, I want to teach you how to read and to study the Word, and going through parallel passages in the English version can help you see where there is a very consistent thought among various translators, or where there maybe are words that are more difficult to translate into English. And so translators use multiple words. And when we get to this idea of meek, as we talked about yesterday, we saw that there were different translations. The traditional translation in the King James and the English Standard Version, which I study, has this idea of meek. But we see in other translations the idea of humble or gentle, someone who's contented with who they are, nothing more, nothing less, someone who is free of pride. I gave you my own definition as someone who has great strength, and yet they're gentle with their strength. They have a kind of a quiet strength, and they recognize that their strength really doesn't come from themselves, but is a God strength that the Spirit provides with them. I want to backtrack just a little bit to help you understand why this idea of meek might be something that translators struggle a little bit with, because I don't think it's just a translation issue. I actually think that both in Jesus' day and in our day, people really didn't quite know how to take meek. Is meek something good? Is meek something strong? Or is meek something that's bad and, something that is, something that is weak? Well, part of the problem that we have here is frankly the context that we're in. Now, another principle that I have taught you is that we always try to look at the verses within the context of where they are at. It gives us a better comprehension of the message. Well, let's look at the context, at least, of what has come before. We have two other blessings, right? Blessed are the poor and blessed are those who mourn. Now, both of these words are what I would call extreme words. They are words that are at one end of the spectrum. Let me give you a for instance. When Jesus says in Arabic or in the Hebrew language, whatever language he spoke, and then Matthew, the writer of Matthew, is writing it in Greek. The Greek word for poor, really there are two words. There's pinez, which means not rich, but not necessarily destitute. And this is not the word that Matthew chooses to use. He uses the word patakos, which again, we learned earlier means to be destitute, someone who has this absolute and abject poverty. Someone, as I described it, who is a beggar, covers his eyes, holds out his hands. Someone who knows that their own spirit themselves is absolutely poverty-stricken and thus is fully dependent upon God. We get to this idea of mourning, and again, we have we see that the Greeks, and again, for those of you who would challenge me on this, I know that Jesus didn't necessarily, although we don't know this, but probably didn't teach in Greek, but certainly Matthew translated. Low-cost lighting here. Certainly Matthew translated in Greek. The Greeks had 9 different words for grief or sorrow. And this word mourning, blessed are those who mourn, as I mentioned to you a couple of days ago when I was in the cemetery, this is by far the strongest word of all. This is the word that is used when someone is mourning for the death of someone who is very, very close to them. The Greeks actually had 9 different words to express grief or sorrow, and this by far is the strongest. It's the word that the Greeks, or when the translation of the Old Testament was being done in something called the Septuagint, in the 200 years or so before Christ, the Bible that most likely was the one used by the early apostles. This is the one that described Jacob when he lost his, or thought he lost his son Joseph. It's this patakos is this grief. In Mark 16:10, when the disciples are mourning for Jesus, they are expressing this greatest, deepest sorrow, this deep inner agony associated with death. Now, again, as we talked about, this is a sorrow that Christ followers actually maintain. They have it in a couple of ways. There's this great, deep sorrow for themselves in terms of the sin that separates them from God. But then there's also this feeling that, boy, the world just isn't right because of sin, not only because of mine, but because of the world's sin. And because of that, the world isn't as it should be, and we have this great mourning, this great grief over creation not being what God has intended. There's a non-biblical proverb that states, all sunshine makes a desert. Things aren't always bright, and it's this mourning, this sorrow that sometimes brings out this good side of things. Well, when we get to the word meek, and I see I'm almost out of time, so let me wrap it up quickly. When we get to this word meek, meek is not like this extreme of poor, not like this extreme of mourning. Meek is actually an in-between word. And if you want to know what I mean by that and how exactly in between it is and how it's different than the two blessings that come before it, well, you're just going to have to join me again on Saturday. Hey, thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you again tomorrow.